So welcome to Unbroken, the safe place for male survivor podcast. Because every male survivor deserves hope, healing, support, and a BMW. And here's your male survivor, leadership coach, and hypnotherapist, Thomas Edward. All right, my peeps, my guys, what's up? What's up? All right, happy Thursday. All right, yep, it's Thursday morning here, and you can tell that the heat is coming. You might hear the fans in the background, so I'll apologize for that up front, but you can tell when we're hitting the triple digits, right? So you get up in the morning, and you'll notice everyone's trying to get their walks in. They're trying to get everything pretty much done. I'm going to say by 10 o'clock, by 10 a.m., because when you wake up and like it's already 80 degrees, then you know that it's going to be a triple digit day. So everyone gets out and you see people busy, and then they go into the house where the air condition is until the evening, and then they come out in the evening and maybe take their walks. But you know, there's swimming pools and things that you can go to also. So like I said, if the fans are going off in the back, sorry for that. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Of course, my UK people, you guys are kicking it. We've got some people now listening from Brazil. All right. So that's great. If you're in Brazil there, keep it up. If you got questions, feel free to send questions and we'll try and answer them on the podcast. All right, guys, we're getting ready for the next cohort to come through. So if you've been going up to the website, and you probably notice it looks a little bit different now because I've added a whole new section, and it's called I Love a Survivor, so the partner resource. So you notice I've been doing some podcasts for those of you that love a survivor and you're trying to figure out what in the world is going on. I don't understand what's going on with this guy, what's going on with this person. That's what some of those podcasts were. And now I've kind of put up there a partner resource center. So you can go up and there's some, questions, frequently asked questions. And then I've actually created some things for you to download. And so if you go to the website, you'll notice the various subjects I'm going to say that are up there on the website. So when you go up to the website, now, if you're a survivor and you're ready to start maybe working through and try to figure out if this is the right program for you, then just go up and simply click I am a survivor, start here. And that's going to run you through the, Life by Your Design 2-week little email thing that's going to take you through just to make sure you're kind of ready. Like, let me get a taste of this before I actually do it. And then there's another button up there that says, I Love a Survivor for partners. And when you click on that, it'll take you to the page, right? And so there's a male survivor partners survival guide. Then I've got several things that you can download, different articles and things that I've written. So understanding the male survivor, how to support a male survivor without losing yourself when trauma shows up in the relationship, intimacy after childhood sexual abuse. And then actually, which was really nice of the individuals that did that. So here's one of the things, usually when I'm working with survivors, I'll ask them, how do you want to give back? So when this whole thing is over, how do you want to give back? Well, sometimes some of the partners and spouses, they're just so appreciative that they want to give back also. And so what they might do is I might ask them, hey, can you just write what it was like for you on your perspective as you were going through this so I can share it with other people? So we have up on the website, which we have permission to. Of course, I don't put their names in there, right? Okay. But people who shared parts of their story. So one wrote one called, I Thought He Didn't Love Me Anymore. The other one is, I Thought I Could Save Him. One person wrote about, I thought he was having an affair. That happens. And then one from a college student, which was the drive to college. So their relationship and how it was affected. And then, of course, below that, you've got the podcast that we've talked about. So you can just click on them and actually listen to them. So feel free, go up to the website, check out, some of the new things that are there. You guys know me. I'm always kind of brainstorming, thinking about things. And, it's like, the partners too. And so I always had this idea that, hey, it would be great, like when we did the workshops, if then I could have someone take the spouses and partners and work with them while I'm actually working with the male survivors at the same time. And then we come, but who knows what happens, right? Someone sent me an email and they're like, oh man, I've just learned so much from you. And this is helping me so much, the podcast and the different things. And the person said, if I win the lottery, then I am going to fund you. I'm like, if you win, bring it on. There's more than enough people who need the help. Which reminds me, so for the month of June, those of you that are interested, if you are going through the Life by Design, and you get through that and you say, hey, you know what? I want to do the full Break My Abuse program. There is a 15% scholarship discount on the ADD program, which is the 9-month program. So just keep that in mind. If you're thinking about, you're kind of on the, should I do this? Should I not? I'm on the fence. Just letting you know for the month of June that there is a 15% discount scholarship on the ADD program. All right. Let's get into this. This is one, I would say it's close to my heart, but a lot of individuals that I actually coach fall into this category. And it's faith-based, if you want to call it that. But a lot of the people that I work with that come in, I'm going to say, with this issue are in almost like cults, like religious cults. And it's like sometimes we have to do the deprogramming while we're also working with dealing with the sexual abuse also. So I'm going to call today's episode Faith Under Fire. Okay, I think that'll be, now don't even want to, freak out there like, oh, fire. Okay, faith under fire. So let's talk about faith. And so for those of you that, for you, this is something, tune in here. And when I'm talking about faith, I'm not talking about the polished version, that people put on social media, but I'm talking about the version, I'm going to say, that lives in the nervous system of the man whose abuse is actually wrapped in religion. Okay. Now, for a lot of male survivors, the damage wasn't only, hey, what happened to your body or what happened to your boundaries or what happened to your mind, but it was also what happened to your meaning. And so you weren't just abused, but you were also spiritually, I'm going to say, invaded. And when abuse happens in a religious context, in the church or whatever, or maybe the word is used, a godly home, right? So your home is supposed to look a certain way, at least to people on the outside, and there might be abuse and stuff going on the inside. Or it happens under a leader who's sitting there quoting you scriptures, and they're telling you, of course, what God wants. Then oftentimes, I'm going to say, faith becomes fused with threat. So you'll hear people say things like this, and I hear this all the time. And sometimes it's just, for me, it's like nails on a chalkboard. And so, individuals are trying to work through things. Maybe the person who was the perpetrator, like, oh, just forgive, just forgive, willy-nilly, whatever, just forgive. And once again, this just is my pet peeve, is that we're always throwing the responsibility on the victim. Okay, calm down, T, calm down. So you hear things like that, like just forgive, or, if it happened in that religious, don't blame God. And then one of my really, I'm going to say, pet peeves one is, hey, you know what? God works all things together for, and those of you that are in that, you can even complete that, right? Please never say that in my presence. Or, hey, it was a person that wasn't God, or they'll just tell you to let it go. But what they don't understand is that when you're a male survivor, we're going to say, and faith was used as a weapon, your body doesn't separate theology from terror. Okay. So your nervous system learned, hey, this God talk, spiritual talk stuff can be dangerous. It learned prayer can be dangerous. It learned that authority, especially religious authority, can be danger. And I see it so much oftentimes when individuals are trying to work through this, and even just, referring to an identity, a deity as father just makes them go crazy, especially if the father was the abuser or something like that, or the priest was the abuser. And so then that authority really becomes dangerous. Obedience can be dangerous, okay, or becomes dangerous. And then being seen also can be dangerous. So even if you want God, even if you miss spirituality, even if part of you wants to believe again, your body still can react like you are back in time, in that place, in that room or wherever. And so I'm going to say it's not a story about someone being bitter at God. So don't take it when it's like, oh, man, you just really don't. No, that's not the thing. But this is a story of I'm going to say, a man whose faith just got set on fire. That's why I call it faith under fire. And he's trying to figure out what's left that's really real for him. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to share with you a story. I'm going to share with you actually Ethan's story here.
I grew up in a house where we prayed for everything. We prayed before meals. We prayed before bed. We prayed before road trips. We prayed after fights. We prayed when someone got sick. God wasn't a part of life. God was the air. So when the abuse started, it didn't feel like a separate thing. It felt like it got woven into the same fabric. The man who hurt me was trusted, not just by my family, by everyone. He had the voice, the confidence, the respectable image. He talked about purity. He talked about sin. He talked about obedience. And I learned something early. When adults say God, they don't always mean love. Sometimes they mean control. When it happened, I didn't scream. I didn't fight. My body froze and my brain went quiet, like I disappeared inside myself. Afterward, I remember sitting in church and hearing worship songs about God being a protector. And I'd think, protector of who? Because he didn't protect me. But I couldn't say that out loud. If I questioned anything, I was rebellious. If I looked sad, I was ungrateful. If I acted out, I needed discipline and prayer. I started believing something that I never said, but I felt either God is watching and doesn't care, or God is watching and he approves. That messes you up, because then the fear isn't just people. The fear becomes the universe. I tried to pray as I got older, but my chest would tighten, my heart would race. I'd feel sick and angry at the same time, so I stopped. Then I went through a phase where I hated everything religious. I called it brainwashing. I said God wasn't real. But the truth, I didn't feel free. I felt hollow. I wasn't just losing religion, I was losing meaning. And the worst part is, sometimes I still miss it. Not the fear, but the idea that there's a safe place to rest. I want spirituality back. But I don't want the panic. I don't want the guilt. I don't want the feeling that I'm bad for even asking questions. I don't know what I believe. I just know I don't want to live in a world where what happened to me was holy.
So in Ethan's story there, Ethan is not confused because, he's been labeled as, hey, you're weak. And I hear that so many times, oh, you're morally weak so he's not confused because of that. He's confused because his faith system got wired to his threat system. And when those two merge, you don't just question, we're going to say God intellectually or your spiritual, whatever beliefs intellectually. You question, like he said, this deity or God in your bones. And so a lot of men actually try to solve it by going through two extremes like he talked about. And so extreme number one is you just forget it. I don't want to have nothing to do with faith. Or extreme number two is I'll stay religious, but I'll pretend that the abuse didn't affect me. So, but trauma really doesn't care what you say that you believe. So trauma cares what your body has actually learned. And so for Ethan, his body learned, when we talk about God language, that God language can actually precede the danger. For him, his body learned that authority was unsafe. And then for him, with the religious background that he had, confession was punished. Okay, so and which is funny because he would talk about it. You were encouraged, of course, to confess whatever your sins and stuff. But then, okay, so you're being honest and confessing, and then you get punished for it. Okay, so in his perspective, well, silence is holy, right? You just don't say anything, and then you always had to be compliant, right? That's what kept you protected. And so that's why, he said it's kind of like putting on this other mask. And so what you're doing is you're just making sure that you're compliant. So then that way you don't get questions, and that way you're not seen, you don't stand out. And then that way you can actually make it through. So let's kind of slow down and let's just name it. We're going to say it a little bit clearer. We always talk about, of course, the deeper breakdown. We always talk about the CSA roots. So we're going to say Ethan's root injury wasn't only sexual violation, but it was also spiritual distortion. Okay. And so what do I mean by that? I think maybe there's a couple of ways when we think about this, maybe 5 different things at least is coming to my brain at this time when we talk about it was a spiritual distortion. Okay, so the first one is that the abuse happened inside of what I'm going to call a sacred frame. You can call it holy frame, whatever, but sacred frame. And that's where the environment taught that, hey, you know what? Adults speak for God. So they speak for this higher power. It happened inside of the sacred frame that says authority is divinely endorsed. Okay, so you have this person who represents this spiritual deity, this divinity. And so whatever authority they have over you is granted. Whatever they say you're supposed to do, whatever they say you're supposed to believe, you believe. And so the abuse wasn't experienced as, well, this is a bad man. It was experienced as God is involved. Okay, because God is the one who's put this person, whatever, in this position. And so now it's distorting. It's the spiritual distortion for the person. I'm going to say the next thing is that the abuser was trusted and spiritually credible. I hear so many stories when I have guys I'm working with and the sexual abuse took place, whatever, in a religious frame, whether it be, Catholic, evangelical, just all the different types. And so when a trusted leader harms a child, the imprint becomes, look, if he represents goodness, goodness isn't safe. Or if he's still respected, even after what he's done to you, then from your perspective, truth doesn't matter, right? And so now you've got this, we're going to say cognitive dissonance, because you're in this area, this perspective that, okay, we're supposed to tell the truth, and okay, but then what this person is doing to me, doesn't represent truth. And so that must mean that truth actually really doesn't matter. So think about all that stuff that the child is trying to hold. And then it means that this creates moral confusion. And this moral confusion lasts for decades, right? And that's why I said, so oftentimes when I'm working with individuals, we have to unravel all this. So we're unraveling the sexual abuse. We're unraveling, if you want to call it, the religious, spiritual distortion. And man, it's often embedded really deeply. I'm going to say that the third thing is that the child's survival response actually becomes spiritualized. So that freeze or that compliance or even silence, those actually become interpreted as, for the child, hey, I'm being obedient because I'm not saying anything. I'm keeping the secret. And so coming then from that religious authority figure, the child is thinking of like, yeah, I'm being good. I'm being obedient because I'm not making waves. And so then the nervous system learns to survive through submission. Okay. And then that means that submission idea is just now totally reinforced in this religious arena. I'm going to say the next one. I'm going to say the child had no safe language for protest, right? So the child couldn't say, hey, this is wrong, right? Usually if they did, they would be ridiculed or like, no, this is the way that we show love, or this is the way that God shows love. Or the child didn't have safe language to protest and saying, well, this scares me, or even that, God wouldn't want this. Especially when the system actually punishes you for questioning. Who are you to question, right? The man of God or the woman of God or whatever. And so the child forms these private beliefs. And the beliefs, which are really hard to break. And I think one day I'm going to have an individual on that we had to work through stuff if they feel comfortable. And we'll talk about this, and so you can hear from his perspective. So the child forms these private beliefs. One, maybe God is disappointed in me, or because of what's being done to me. And once again, it's the victim that's taking the shame and the blame. So now the child is thinking, I'm dirty, or the child is thinking, this person's so holy, so it must be me who's causing this. And then because of that, it means that I must stay quiet. I can't rock the boat. I think the final one, at least I can think off the top of my head, is that faith becomes fused with fear and shame. We talked about that a little bit when we first started off, but when this sacred is paired with this violation that's taking place, the result is, at least for, we're going to say, the person of faith, that prayer can actually trigger panic. So I've seen that before. Maybe they'll go to like a worship something or session, and then that triggers anger, right? Because like, how could you allow this to happen to me? I had one guy, and for him, because scripture was used so much, scripture actually triggered shame for him. And then just the whole concept of deity, of God, whatever, actually triggered dread. Now, that's not theology. Once again, that's conditioning. All right, so like in Ethan's case, there were some reinforcing factors, right? That kept, I'm going to say, him locked in. And so as Ethan grew, there were multiple, I'm going to say, forces that kept confirming the same message. One, and this is the big one, was shame-based teaching. Shame-based teaching. And man, like I said, when I have guys coming through, we have to do some serious program. Anything sexual was considered dirty, sinful, and weak, right? And so now just think about that. You're the child. And so anything that's sexual represents this, but this person's doing this to you, right? So that means now you take on what you think is, well, it's me, I'm sinful, I'm weak, or I'm dirty. So shame-based teaching. So the survivor doesn't just feel harmed, he actually feels bad, right? So now we're starting to wrap into this whole identity thing. And then silence is often framed as right or righteousness. So, hey, you know what? We don't speak ill of people, even if they're doing things bad or wrong to you, right? Or we don't accuse. I've heard that so many times. Oh, you're not supposed to, accuse an elder or whatever, or deacon, whatever, of what, and they're doing bad things to you. Or, hey, don't cause division, right? So if you say this and bring this out, it's going to cause division. There might be a split. So that means that truth, whatever your truth is, your truth actually becomes rebellion. Okay, so then once again, when we're talking about the spiritual, it is creating more harm. And then often with a lot of the religious, we're going to say areas and spiritual abuse, I call it obedience of training, especially for those of you that have been in those areas from a young, early age, and you learn obedience training, right? So respect adults. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't respect adults, right? But it's like respect adults no matter what. Honor your mother and father, even if they're the ones that are abusing you. Okay. Submit to authority is an obedience training one. Honor leadership, like we just talked about. And what these do is they reinforce the original survival strategy to actually comply. Then there's the idea, at least for Ethan, when we talk about what kept him locked in, what was those reinforcing factors, was the fear of being blamed. So in religious contexts, we're going to say survivors often feel, or this is what you'll hear. I'll share with you what I've heard. You tempted him, or you misread it, right? Or you're just being bitter, maybe because you didn't get your way or something, or you're attacking the church. And so now it's the victim against everybody, right? Creating those sides. Then there's community protection of image. And I see this all the time. I remember I'd gone to one of my friends, David. I can't remember what is David's last name. But he had charges, whatever, against, some pastor or something in the Southern Baptist, whatever church. And this made like national news, and he was on the TV and those different type of things. And he would talk about, that the whole idea of religious organizations sweeping things under the rug is because they're trying to protect the image, right? So the institutions are trying to protect, their reputation, or they're trying to protect leadership. So they'll move them from this place to that place, the predator. And we've taken care of it. There was in-house. We took care of it in-house. Or they're trying to protect what they call, the ministry more than the child, more than the victim. Then there's what's called spiritual bypassing. And so instead of safety, what happens is the survivor gets, hey, do the quick forgiveness thing, right? And I hear that so many times, right? Just forgive, move on. And if you can't do that, there's something wrong with you. You're spiritually weak, right? Or when we talk about spiritual bypassing, prayer without accountability. Oh my goodness, I've seen that one so many times. Or the message of God allowed it language, right? That's where we come up with, he uses all things for good, whatever nonsense. that I've heard. But what these do is they invalidate the survivor's nervous system and what's going on with them. And then what happens is oftentimes because of this, what keeps the person locked in is what we call an identity collapse. So if faith was your whole world, and I've run into people where it is their whole world, and we'll be working with them like, do you have any friends outside of these religious organizations? And they're like, no. And that's why I said oftentimes they can be like cults because you're locked in, right? Oh, you can't go talk to them. They're the unworthy ones, or, we can't have anything to do with those people because they're bad, they're evil. And so then the person, all they know is this whole world. So let's just think of, the child and grows up into adulthood. And so their faith is this whole world. And then if they feel like they're losing it, there's this identity collapse, like I'm losing family, or I'm losing meaning, or belonging. Now I'm not going to be able to belong. Hey, if I report this and talk about this, I'm not going to be able to belong. So leaving costs too much, and so they actually stay within the system that's actually hurting them. That's the trap. Okay, that's the trap. All right, so when we talk about adult impact, I'm going to share with you some of the ways that it was showing up for Ethan, how it was showing up for him. So in adulthood, in Ethan's life, I'm going to say it wasn't just spiritual complication, but there was also physiological things that were taking place and impacting him in his life. So he would have panic attacks with nausea around spiritual practices. So maybe he might want to pray, but he would notice that his body would react as if, there was like a danger, danger will rob yours. Or for him, he would have, as we talked about before, crisis of meaning. And so he would often use words, and he would describe it as like empty, hopelessness. And that was because faith was used to be we're going to call his organizing thing in life, right? So his whole life was organized around this whole faith idea. And then for him, there was guilt for questioning. And I remember those conversations we would have. And as a coach, sometimes you have to realize people are working through things. And so I'm like, okay, come on, dude, don't ask whatever question that you need to. You don't have to have any guilt for asking a question. A question is a question. But even after leaving, we're going to say religion, especially if it's cult-like, that inner judge stays with you that says you're wrong, that says that you're condemned or damned, or that you're rebellious. And then I think for him, we also had to deal with the rage toward God. I call it the fear of rage. So some men feel angry, and then they fear that anger. So in other words, wait a minute. Let's see, what's the phrase they use? Oh, be angry, whatever, and sin not. So if I'm angry at God, I'll be punished, right? And so that rage toward God. And then, of course, just like survivors, whether religious, but the problem of difficulty in trusting any authority. And so not only whatever, pastors, but also, therapists, right? Doctors, bosses, mentors, coaches, anyone with power that can actually trigger that old imprint. And that's one of the reasons you guys hear me always talking about so much. When you start working with me, the first thing we're trying to establish is safety, because we're not going to get anything done if you don't believe that you are safe, right? That's really, really important. And then I'm going to say the other thing that Ethan experienced, it was hypervigilance, I'm going to say immoral spaces. And so places, for him that talked about purity, that talked about goodness or morality, they would provoke certain things for him, like they would shut down, he would dissociate, because morality got linked to coercion. And so then often that would produce things like what we call spiritual disconnection. Okay, so even, if he still believed intellectually, he can't feel safe spiritually, right? So he's not faithless, but he's braced. Okay, he's braced. So that spiritual disconnection. All right. Woo, that's a lot. It is a lot. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the neuroscience insights on, why the faith is actually triggering the threat. So I'm going to say for Ethan and his struggle, it wasn't, I'm going to say primarily, theological, but it was also neurobiological. Okay, so we have what's known as neuroception, and this is when the body detects danger before the belief. And I think, who wrote a book on this? I think his name was Porges, Porges, I think I remember reading it. But anyway, we talk about how the nervous system doesn't ask, hey, is God real? It asks, is this environment safe, right? So that neuroception, the body detects danger before the belief. So if prayer happened near harm, then the body stores these cues. And so the prayer cue equals danger cues, right? And so then it's hard for him to go back into this place, whatever, if they start praying, or, you're sitting there and you're getting ready to eat whatever, dinner, lunch, whatever, and people like, okay, let's say grace, let us pray, right? Man, and that would send him off. And so then later, the spiritual cues, they can trigger things like for him, chest, throat, and, his chest tightening, throat constriction, shallow breathing. Sometimes he would feel nauseous or just really agitated and irritated. And it's not because we're going to say that God is unsafe, but because the nervous system associates the spiritual stuff with the signal of threat. Okay. Neuroscience. What else is going on? We talked about meaning before. So we're going to say meaning-making circuits, they actually get hijacked by the trauma. So what happens is that the trauma, it actually pressures the brain to create a story fast. Okay, like, why is this happening? Or what does this mean about me? Remember, we talked about, being dirty and the sexual nature of it, and you've been taught with this certain shame-based teaching. And so when the context is religious, the default meaning becomes, I'm sinful, I deserve this, and God is judging me. And so these meanings, they don't live, we're going to say, like thoughts. They live like wiring, right? That's how entrenched that they are, that they're just like wiring. From a neuro science perspective, I'm going to say conditioned fear response actually to sacred language was one of the things that I noticed with Ethan. So for him, certain words would become triggers. Okay, submit was one, obedience, purity, confession. So he was in an organization. Anytime you thought you did something wrong, you had to go confess. Authority. And when we talk about these conditioned fear responses to the sacred language, remember we talked about that good old amygdala, that little, threat alarm. Well, the amygdala doesn't interpret nuance. It only interprets association. So if those words are associated when we talk about this conditioned language, then the amygdala, we're going to say, fires. For Ethan, we had to deal with, I don't know how to explain this, but remember we talked about, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, those different type of things. For him, it was a freeze response, but it was a freeze response with also, I'm going to say, a spiritual compliance loop. Okay. So, I guess the way to explain it is this. I'm trying to think of from him. So during the abuse, sometimes people freeze, right? And for him, he said that during the abuse, there were times when he did freeze, right? And so you've got that immobility or, the shut down voice or the dissociating. And so that freeze response is equal to or get loops with what this idea of spiritual compliance loop looks like. So then later, religion may praise compliance or reinforce that actual freeze pattern. And so now the message that is associated with this is that freeze equals or means that you're a good boy. Okay. And so that makes healing very hard and challenging because healing, at least if you're working on me, is going to require voice. It's going to require boundaries and it's going to require truth. But these are the very things that he learned that they were dangerous. All right, I think that's let me see if I can just knock off one more off the top of my head in dealing with this. Memory. So memory reconsolidation. So oftentimes when we talk about the spiritual realm and the abuse taking place, so memory consolidation actually gets blocked by avoidance. And so if spirituality triggers panic, of course, then he avoids it. And so avoidance then prevents, we're going to say, the brain updating its map. And so the body never learns that, you know what, I can be spiritual and I can be safe at the same time, right? And not because that you're stubborn, but once again, because your nervous system is protecting you. All right. Ooh, oh my goodness, we're 40 minutes into this. All right. This is an important one to me, guys. Because it's, like I said, it's in a lot of stories of individuals that I work with, and it was also part of my story for a while. And so sometimes it becomes very personal. But so when we talk a little bit about strategy, how do we work through this? How do we regulate? How do we reframe this, right? And so let's just say maybe this is you. Maybe you're like Ethan, and you're like, man, what do I do? It's like, man, I just feel like I can't engage in these practices anymore. I can't pray or whatever. All right. So first of all, you don't start by forcing yourself to do whatever these things are, these practices. So maybe, you think, well, if I just hear people say pray it away. So if you just start, forcing yourself to pray, it's going to kind of alleviate everything. So we start, of course, first, like we said, with safety, we start by reducing the threat and restoring choice. Well, like I said, this can really be challenging for individuals that have been part of things that look like religious cult because you were taught that you didn't have a choice. And so now we're trying to restore something that you think that you shouldn't utilize. So we're going to say that when we're talking about a strategy, one of the things that we can do, and this is what I did with Ethan, name the unsafe belief. And when you do, make it one sentence. Okay. Now, if you're following this, I'm going to give you a little something that you can do. So write like one belief that shows up automatically for you. Just write it down. So you name that unsafe belief. So maybe for you, the unsafe belief is God hates me. Or maybe the unsafe belief is God allowed it. Or, God was part of it, or which is the one I hate. Oh, that was, he knows everything, so that was his plan for me. And look, I'm the better for it. Or maybe the unsafe belief was that I'm dirty. Okay, so you're going to write them down. And you might have more than one, that's fine. The thing is, I don't want you to censor it. What we're doing is we're exposing it. We have to expose whatever that unsafe belief is, okay? Because those hidden beliefs are actually running in the background in our nervous system. All right. So now what we have to do in this strategy, we're going to have to replace it. We're going to say with a gentler alternative, not a perfect one, but with a gentler one. not right doctrine, right, but a gentler alternative, a less threatening statement. And maybe it looks something like this. Hey, maybe God actually weeps with me, right? Whatever it is that I was going through when I was being abused, maybe he was actually, weeping with me. Or maybe God, or spiritual being, whatever, higher power, whatever you, was not actually represented by my abuser. Okay. In other words, you're starting to distinguish. Hey, you know what? There was just a jerk side to that person. That wasn't God, even though he was supposed to be. That was him. Or maybe even that the system failed me. God didn't fail me, but the system actually failed me. Or maybe saying or writing down, maybe what happened was evil, not holy, and it shouldn't have been done to me. Okay. So the goal with this strategy is we're simply de-escalating. Okay. Not certainty, but like we said, we're gently giving ourselves that alternative. Now, the next strategy, though, that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create, I'm going to call this spiritual neutrality. And a lot of guys, they get scared when they hear that word because they've been taught there's, the left side, the right side. Are you on the left side or are you on the right side? Are you right or are you wrong? These different type of things. But we have to create spiritual neutrality before, I'm going to call it spiritual intimacy. So maybe instead of so for Ethan, the prayer stuff would trigger him. So instead of prayer, start with maybe just 2 minutes of silence. Or maybe just start with 2 minutes of breath work. Or maybe start with 2 minutes of just walking out in nature, appreciating nature, just grounding yourself. And so not using any, if we want to call it God language, because that would trigger him. But what you're trying to do is you're just trying to teach the body. We're going to say stillness is safe, that stillness is okay. The next thing I'm going to say, strategy would be at some point we have to reclaim agency with, I'm going to say, boundaries, right? And this time I want you to do it if you're trying to work through this. Reclaim your agency with, I'm going to say, one boundary sentence, okay? And maybe there's something that you can practice saying it out loud. Maybe something like, let's see, I don't owe anyone spiritual compliance, okay? Because a lot of individuals are doing that. Or, I'm allowed to question. And yes, you are. I'm allowed to question. Or my body is the authority now, right? Not what this person is telling me to do or to comply with. And so what happens is your voice actually starts to rewire the fear, especially the one for those with I'm allowed to ask questions. Then I think the last one I can think of, I don't know, for some reason my mind's doing fives today. So the fifth one would simply be choose one safe form of spirituality. Okay, choose one safe form of spirituality. So don't choose an environment that hurts you. So maybe a safe form might be, do meditation. Or maybe do, what is that one called? Oh, there's one called a somatic prayer, which is pretty much breath and body scan, right? So for what's going on. Journal, journal to God, like you're writing to God, right? So then that way, God, whatever is your witness. If stillness is an issue for you, do a walking prayer, okay? Choose whatever one safe form of spirituality or music, right? Music, I'm going to say without shame language, okay? Because if you're listening to music and it still has those shame-based teaching language in it, then that's going to trigger you also. And so that means that faith, the spirituality can be rebuilt through, we're going to say, safety-based repetition, not pressure. Now, for those of you like, man, this is hard, then you really need to work with someone, right? So many of the individuals that come through, they picked me because they're like, hey, I know that you used to have whatever spiritual background, and still, yes, but there were certain things I had to learn how to redefine from what I had been told or taught, or right. And so that's even in this whole journey, right? It's about redefining things for ourselves. So that's something to think about. So one survivor, I'm going to say, that I coached, he had abandoned his whole idea of, spirituality, religion for like over a decade or two. And I remember he told me, he says, every time that I try to pray, my throat closes, I can't breathe, and I feel like I'm about to get punished. Okay, so when I started working with him, we didn't start, of course, with prayer because that was a trigger for him. But we started with the nervous system permission, right? And so I told him, I said, you don't have to call it prayer, right? Yeah, you don't have to talk, I'm going to say, to God yet. And you just have to be with your body and with your body safely. And so I remember for him, we would have him just practice 3 minutes of like breath and grounding work. And he did that daily. So no theology yet, no sermons, no guilt. And so then after several weeks, he said, well, I can actually sit in silence without, kind of bracing myself. And we added one sentence. And I told him, I said, this is not a prayer. This is just a statement, right? And the statement was that if God is good, because that's what he had been taught, right? If God is good, he sees me. Okay, that was it. And because oftentimes, individuals are like, okay, if it was there, why didn't he allow it? Or why didn't he stop it? He didn't see me. He wasn't there. And so one of the phrases we just said, okay, if God is good, he sees me. So months later, I remember he told me, he said, you know what? Hey, now I've gotten to the point where I can finally pray without panic. Right. And he says, not because he forced whatever the belief was, but because his body was not interpreting God as danger. So it stopped interpreting God as danger. Woo, guys, that's a lot. Let me tell you, I could do a whole bunch more, but I think we're going to call it for the day for this morning. So I want us to think about this. Maybe I'm going to say for our closing reflection, for us to think about, if religion was used to silence you, and it makes sense that your system, learn to go quiet, you learn to be compliant. As we said, you learn to obey. And if this language, spiritual language, God language, was used to control you, it makes sense that your body rejects it. So if that's where you are, just realize that's normal. That's common. Realize that you are not broken, but maybe you're conditioned. And sometimes that's even hard for us if we have these religious beliefs. How dare you say that I'm being conditioned? And, that's not right. Okay, just breathe. Just breathe. Because the goal isn't to go back to faith like nothing happened if you were abused. The goal is to rebuild meaning in a way that doesn't cost you and your nervous system. So this is what I want you to do to think about. Here are just some prompt reflections for you to think about for those of you that are dealing with this. So what word about spirituality, about God, deity, whatever you call, triggers you the most? And what does your body do when you hear it? Now, this would be a great time to journal. If you notice these things, then just start writing them down. I'm going to say the next reflection prompt would be, do you fear God? Do you fear deity, higher power, whatever? Or do you feel the version of God that your abuser used? That is a very, very important question for you to think. And oftentimes, like I said, when we're talking about, because we've been indoctrinated with certain things, then maybe the version that you have of spirituality, the version that you have of God, is the one that your abuser used. And maybe it's actually not yours. Okay, so that's a really big key one. And then I'm going to say the last reflection prompt would be, what would a safe spirituality for you look like? What would it look like? And especially if it's centered, we're going to say around your nervous system and not someone else's authority. Okay. So that's also, so those are three questions that we can really think about and reflect on and help us possibly to start working through. And the reason I gave you some of the strategies, like we did with Ethan, to give you some possible options to actually start working through these things if it's something that you need to do. And like I said, this one's a very challenging one oftentimes to work through. And I'm going to just say, if you are, make sure you find someone, a competent person who can actually help you work through this area. All right, guys, that's it. Faith Under Fire. For those out there that, this is something that you're dealing with, I hope that there was something here that, helped you. Feel free. Like I said, if you got a question or two, shoot me a question, say, hey, Coach T, I didn't kind of understand this, or maybe this is the situation. And, you never know. And so shoot the email, and if I can answer it, I'll answer it, for you, either podcast, or I'll just reply to it and say, okay, this is my take on it. And hopefully that helps you. All right, guys, continue to have a great Thursday out there. Hopefully you are in a place where you don't have to turn the air conditioner on, or if you do, maybe you were fortunate to actually have an air conditioner to actually turn on. Whatever it might be, just realize that the person that is talking to you right now is a person who cares about you. And you just need to know, right, that there is someone out there that cares about you. And if you think, wow, there's nobody, yes, you remind yourself there's at least one person, and you're listening to that voice right now. All right, guys, until our next podcast, make sure to be safe.